The Triple Murder in Queens, a Bernard Miller Mystery Part 1. The Call of Queens. It had been a quiet Friday evening at the Miller home. Bernard, now in his early 40s, was looking forward to spending a rare weekend with his kids. Tasha, a moody but fiercely intelligent 14-year-old, and Anthony, his bright and inquisitive 11-year-old son. Despite the chaos of being a single father and running his private investigator practice, weekends were sacred. His in-laws, Catherine and Joe, were visiting, and Tanisha, the dependable 17-year-old babysitter, was helping Tasha finish a school project. Just as Bernard was about to relax, his phone buzzed. It was Detective Cynthia Toussaint, his trusted partner in countless investigations since the tragic murder of his wife, Fiona. "Bernie, you need to get down here, Queens. There's been a triple murder." Bernard hesitated, thinking of his kids. But this case was different. It was too close to home. Cynthia's voice carried an urgency that Bernard couldn't ignore. After the death of his wife, Bernard had vowed to put his past behind him, but the allure of a case like this was too strong. "All right, I'll be there. Hector already on the scene?" "Yeah, we'll meet you there." Bernard kissed his kids goodnight, reassured his in-laws he wouldn't be gone long, and headed out, the weight of his family and memories of Fiona heavy on his mind. Part 2. The Scene of the Crime. The drive to Queens felt longer than it should have. Memories of his time with the NYPD flooded back. He hadn't been to Queens in years, not since before he left the force to start Tech 1 Computers in Pennsylvania. But even as a private investigator, the bloodhound instinct never left him. Arriving at the scene, he found Hector Ramirez leaning against their unmarked car, his usual serious demeanor even more somber than usual. A perimeter had been set up, and the flashing lights of police cars painted the block in alternating hues of blue and red. "Glad you could make it," Hector said, nodding at Bernard as they walked toward the house. "This one's bad, real bad." They ducked under the crime scene tape and entered the modest brick house. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of death. 3 bodies lay scattered in different rooms: a mother, father, and teenage son. The brutality of the killing sent chills down Bernard's spine. It reminded him of his own loss, and the buried pain of Fiona's murder stirred again. "They were executed," Cynthia said as she joined them, handing Bernard the crime scene photos. "No signs of forced entry. It's methodical, professional." Bernard studied the photos, trying to piece together a motive. Why this family, and why now? Cynthia shook her head. "That's what we need to find out. But there's something else. We found these on the Sun." She handed Bernard a small envelope with several photographs inside. His eyes widened as he flipped through them. Each photo showed members of the Miller family: Bernard, Tasha, Anthony, even his late wife, Fiona. A cold chill ran down Bernard's spine. This wasn't just a random killing. This was a message. Part 3. The Past Catches Up. Back at the Miller house, Bernard couldn't shake the dread gnawing at his mind. He knew someone was trying to send him a warning, a reminder of the life he had tried to leave behind when he left the NYPD. His thoughts kept drifting to his kids, Tasha with her rebellious streak, and Anthony, who was too innocent to understand the dangers lurking around them. That night, while reviewing the case details, Bernard's phone buzzed again. It was an encrypted email, no subject, no sender. He opened it and found a single sentence: "You should have stayed out of New York." His blood ran cold. Whoever had orchestrated the murders in Queens wasn't finished. They were watching him, his family. This was personal. The next day, Bernard brought Cynthia and Hector to his home office. "I think we're dealing with something bigger here," he said, pacing. "Whoever did this knows me. They know about Fiona, and now they're coming after us." "We'll find out who," Hector said, his voice steady. "We've been through worse." "Yeah, but this feels different. It feels planned." They reviewed the evidence again. No forced entry, no theft, just cold, calculated murder. And those photos. Bernard couldn't shake the feeling that someone from his past was behind this, someone he had crossed during his years as an NYPD detective. But who? Then Tanisha knocked on the door. "Mr. Miller? There's a woman outside, says she needs to talk to you." Bernard opened the door and found a nervous woman standing on his porch, her hands trembling. "Are you Bernard Miller?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Sarah Collins. I think I know who killed those people in Queens and why they're coming after you. Part 4. The hunt begins. Sarah's story was as disturbing as it was shocking. She revealed that the murders were connected to a criminal syndicate Bernard had taken down years ago while still with the NYPD. A drug cartel he had infiltrated was seeking revenge, using him as a pawn in their twisted game. The family in Queens had been killed as a warning, a prelude to the real target, Bernard and his kids. "They've been tracking you," Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. "They know everything. Your business, your family, where you live. They want you to suffer." Bernard clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He had thought he'd left that life behind, but it had come back to haunt him, and now his children were in danger. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way to protect his family. "We'll find them," Cynthia said, her voice filled with resolve. "We won't let them get to you or your kids." Bernard nodded, but inside, he knew this wouldn't be easy. The syndicate was ruthless, and they wouldn't stop until they had their revenge. But if there was one thing Bernard Miller knew how to do, it was survive. The next morning, Bernard, Cynthia, and Hector began their hunt for the killers. They traced old contacts, shook down informants, and followed every lead they could find. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, they realized the syndicate was planning something even more sinister, a mass hit on everyone Bernard loved. It became a race against time. Bernard had to outwit the killers, protect his children, and finally confront the demons from his past. But with every step he took, the danger grew closer, and the shadow of death loomed large over his family. The final showdown would come sooner than anyone expected. And when it did, Bernard would have to make the ultimate choice: to risk everything for justice or to walk away and protect the only thing that mattered to him, his family. To be continued. In the thrilling conclusion, Bernard must decide how far he's willing to go to protect those he loves. The stakes have never been higher, and the ghosts of his past are closing in. Part 5. The final showdown. The morning was deceptively calm. Bernard stood by the kitchen window watching his kids in the yard. Tasha, her headphones on, was flipping through a book, while Anthony, with his usual energy, was playing basketball. It felt surreal, like the calm before a storm. And Bernard knew all too well that the storm was coming. In the days since Sarah Collins had come forward with her warning, Bernard, Cynthia, and Hector had been relentless in their search for the syndicate. Every lead they followed pointed to the same conclusion: the cartel had eyes everywhere. They were tracking Bernard's every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. And the chilling fact was, they knew where he lived, where his kids went to school, even where Tanisha and his in-laws resided. The weight of it all was suffocating. Bernard had faced dangerous criminals before, but never with his family in the crosshairs. This was different. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for survival. "They'll come for us soon," Bernard said, his voice grim as he, Cynthia, and Hector gathered in his living room. "They want to draw me out, make me vulnerable." "They know your weakness," Cynthia replied. "Your family." Hector leaned forward. "We've got to be one step ahead. Sarah's intel was good, but it's not enough. We need to flush them out, make them come to us." Bernard's mind raced. The cartel's reach was vast, but they had one weakness: overconfidence. They believed they had him cornered. But Bernard had a plan of his own. "I think it's time we set a trap," Bernard said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But we need to make it look real. I'll be the bait." "No way, Bernie," Cynthia snapped. "You're not doing this alone. You have kids." "I don't have a choice," Bernard interrupted. "This isn't just about me, it's about them." He gestured toward the window where Tasha and Anthony were still playing. "If we don't end this now, they'll never be safe. I won't let that happen." Cynthia and Hector exchanged a glance, the unspoken tension clear. They knew Bernard well enough to understand he wouldn't back down. He was a father first, and nothing mattered more to him than his kids. "All right," Hector finally said. "What's the plan?" Part 6. The Ambush. 2 days later, everything was in place. The location, an abandoned warehouse near the Hudson River, just outside Bloomingdale. Bernard had deliberately leaked false information to one of his old informants, letting it slip that he was moving his family to a safe house in the area. The syndicate would take the bait. Inside the warehouse, Bernard stood alone, waiting. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was sharp, calculating. He wore a wire, with Cynthia and Hector monitoring everything from a surveillance van parked nearby. A tactical unit was on standby, ready to move in as soon as the cartel's men showed their faces. And then, in the stillness of the night, Bernard heard it. The faint hum of engines approaching. The syndicate had arrived. 3 black SUVs rolled up to the warehouse, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Armed men spilled out, their faces hardened, their movements precise. This was a hit squad, no doubt about it. Bernard took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. He had been in this situation before, but it was different now. He wasn't just a detective, he was a father protecting his children. "Showtime," he muttered under his breath. The doors to the warehouse creaked open, and a man stepped inside. Bernard recognized him immediately. Marco Salazar, a high-ranking lieutenant in the cartel, someone Bernard had crossed years ago during his time with the NYPD. "Bernard Miller," Salazar sneered, his voice thick with malice. "You should have stayed out of New York." "I could say the same to you," Bernard replied, his tone cold. "This ends tonight." Salazar chuckled, stepping closer, flanked by his men. "Oh, it ends all right, but not for me. We're gonna make you suffer, just like we did to that family in Queens. And after we're done with you, we'll pay a visit to those precious kids of yours." That was the moment Bernard had been waiting for. "Now," he shouted into the wire. Suddenly, the warehouse erupted into chaos. Flashbangs exploded, blinding Salazar's men as the tactical unit stormed in, guns drawn. Cynthia and Hector were right behind them, leading the charge. The cartel gunmen fired wildly, but they were outmatched. One by one, they fell, until only Salazar remained, cornered and seething with rage. Bernard approached him slowly, his eyes locked on Salazar's. "You think you can threaten my family and walk away?" he growled. "Not this time." Salazar spat on the ground. "You'll never be free of us, Miller. We'll keep coming, again and again." Bernard clenched his jaw, his fists trembling with fury. "Not if I finish it now." But before Bernard could make another move, Cynthia stepped in. "Let the law handle him, Bernie. He's not worth it." For a long moment, Bernard stood there, the weight of everything crashing down on him. He could end it right here, right now. But in his mind, he saw Fiona's face and he knew what she would want. He stepped back, lowering his hands. "Take him away." Part 7. Home again. The aftermath of the raid was swift. Salazar and his surviving men were taken into custody, and the cartel's operations in New York were crippled, at least for the time being. Bernard knew there would always be more threats, more dangers lurking in the shadows, but for now, his family was safe. Back home, Tasha and Anthony waited for him, their faces filled with worry, when he finally walked through the door. "Dad," Anthony cried, running into his arms. "Are you okay?" Bernard hugged him tightly, the tension in his chest finally easing. "I'm fine, buddy. We're all fine." Tasha, too, came over, her tough exterior cracking as she hugged him. "You scared us, Dad." "I'm sorry," Bernard whispered. "But it's over now, I promise." Catherine and Joe, who had been watching from the living room, exchanged relieved glances. Even Tanisha, who had stayed to help with the kids, smiled as she watched the reunion unfold. Later that night, after the house had quieted down and the kids were asleep, Bernard sat alone in his study, looking at a photo of Fiona. "I kept my promise," he murmured. "I kept them safe." But deep down, Bernard knew that the fight wasn't truly over. There would always be new dangers, like new enemies. But as long as he had his family, he would keep fighting. Because in the end, that's all that mattered. The end.